Hey, First Draft Club. Today I want to talk about something I do when I am reading in order to research for a novel that I'm writing. I have never given this thing I do a name before, but I came up with one for this episode. I am calling it the Marginalia Method. First, I'm going to tell you the why behind this method. That is why I even do it at all. Then I'm going to tell you how it works. So let's go. Welcome to the First Draft Club, a podcast to help you write your book with joy, clarity, and maybe a few coffee stains. I'm Mary Atkins. Okay, I teach that when you start a novel or memoir, you want to start with a big question. Your job as the author is not to answer this question, but to explore it. Okay, so as Chekhov famously stated, the role of the artist is to ask questions, not to answer them. So you can relieve yourself of the pressure of being some kind of guru. You don't have to have figured everything out to be a great writer, okay? You just have to be willing to entertain honest questions and brave enough to share the real human struggle that these questions raise for us. This method of asking a big question is vital to giving yourself an engine to get you to or beyond the 70,000 word point. In other words, to finishing a draft. Stories that don't have a big question tend to peter out. Like often when someone comes to me and says like, oh, I keep starting books and then they peter out, it's because they don't have a big question. So the big question is an invaluable tool. But recently, I was talking with a writer in my program, the program I run, the book incubator, about how when you're serious about the big question, sometimes it can be easy to get bogged down in the existential questions and possibilities that big question raises for you, particularly while you're researching. Okay, so for example, in the novel that I'm currently working on, that I'm currently writing, I explore the line between performance and deception. So I have some books on performance art. I'm also writing about a multi-level marketing company in my story. And so I have a book on the history of multi-level marketing and a couple of other books on this kind of company structure. I have loved reading these books. I always love going down a rabbit hole in novel research. It's fun and thrilling because learning is enjoyable in general, but it's especially enjoyable when you're doing it for a reason, or at least when I am. The problem is that when you acquire a wealth of new knowledge about a particular subject relevant to the book that you're writing, whether it's the stock market that you're researching, or watercolor painting, or what did houses look like in 1912, whatever it may be. The problem is that when you acquire a lot of knowledge about that particular subject, the scope of what is possible for you to tackle in your book around that subject skyrockets, right? I can get overwhelmed by possibility or by the complexity and nuance of what I've learned, going back to the big question, right? It's like it starts to feel like, there are all of these contours that I'm going to want to explore and examine. Where do I even plug in and how do I cover all of this? It can lead to feeling like, unable to write at all. Like if, I've found myself thinking before, like, how can I possibly tackle everything I've just learned about? How do I address all of these layers? That, or I'm not daunted. I'm excited and I try. I dive right in, even though, it's way more complicated and sophisticated and thorough than what my narrative needs. I think, well, I know all this new information. Let me go ahead and include it all so that the reader trusts me as the narrator, as the expert. And also, I can just enjoy celebrating everything I've learned and put it in my book. This is still a problem, though, if that's not obvious, which is that a novel that includes certain facts rarely needs to include an entire other book's worth of details about those facts, right? Yeah, I don't think I need to expound on that. We will leave that there. So if you relate at all to either of these situations, which I'm going to go ahead and call either research overwhelm or research fanaticism, keep listening because I want to talk about this way of avoiding both. So here we go. Meet the Marginalia Method. Marginalia meaning the notes or scribbles that are in the margin of a book or document. As I am reading a book for research and coming across cool things that might fit in my narrative, I jot that idea in the margin of the book, as in the book that I'm reading, not the book that I'm writing. When I finish the book that I'm reading for research, I have anywhere from 5 to 45 possible applications of things I've learned in it to my story. And they're all bite-sized because I was confined to the margin of the page. These ideas range from super small, an idea for a side character's name or a very minor detail to include, to really big and thematic. I might have a big plot twist idea or an epiphany idea for a character. But even the big ideas, and this is what's really important, even those big ideas are condensed to just a phrase or a sentence because I have the constraints of that 1-inch margin. Why is this constraint useful? Well, because when you're writing a first draft, one of your biggest enemies is overwhelm. Overwhelm is what stops most writers from finishing the work, or even starting for that matter. The work feels too big, the project too complex or obtuse or daunting. And so before anything else, we have to find ways to make the work manageable. That is the most important thing. Restricting the time or space in which you write is a way to do this. Margins are space. Smaller space means more manageable ideas. Think of the margins of the book like a suitcase you're packing for a trip. It's a container that prevents you from taking too many, maybe I'll wear this too outfits, so that when you get there, you can actually haul your bag onto the train, right? And wear what you brought. Now, I'm using the term margins kind of loosely here. Many of my notes are short enough that they fit into that, 1-inch white column on the side of the page. But sometimes my scribbles do drift onto the book's blank end pages, which exist in every book. The good news is that every book only has a couple of those pages tops, so there is still a pretty rigid constraint there. And my notes very rarely, if ever, venture outside of that book itself. I really try to keep myself constrained to the space that's available there in that, cover to cover bit. On every page where I make a note in the margin, I earmark the bottom corner. And then when I finish reading, I go through all of the earmarked pages and I review my ideas from the margins. Any that I want to incorporate, I transfer onto a to-do list. And any that I am no longer excited about, I just abandon, discard. Another great thing about this method, though, is that it doesn't just help you avoid overwhelm. There are 2 other benefits of the Marginalia method that I want to highlight. First, it's efficient. It's more efficient than reading an entire book for research and then, separately once you're done, devoting more effort to figuring out how you want to incorporate what you have learned into your story. Yes, we don't want to be worshipers of efficiency by any means, but it's also true that for those of us juggling jobs and families and writing, efficiency is incredibly valuable. And this is a very efficient method. Second, it makes the reading really fun and interactive. Sort of like you're getting to read a book, but also go on a treasure hunt at the same time. It reminds me that last summer We went to Paris, my family, and my son, who was 6 at the time, was obsessed with this Space Invader game that one of our tour guides told us about. There are these little Space Invader paintings on buildings scattered throughout the city of Paris. And once my kids started looking for them, he was hooked, like, on finding these things, and he would forget that his legs were tired and he would walk miles with us, which he ordinarily would not do, trust me, because he wanted to find that next invader. Reading a book for research while also looking for story applications is kind of like doing this, at least for me. I'm on a quest, which brings fresh energy to my reading while helping me conceptualize and retain the information that I'm reading. Win-win. So that is my little tool for research, the Marginalia Method. I hope this was helpful. I will see you in the next episode where I'm going to share thoughts on long-term goals, fatigue, and mindset. See you then.